the architect. Often called the mastermind behind the Republican Party, an expert in persuasion, influence, and how power truly works in this country and for you. So today I'm honored to bring former Deputy Chief of Staff to President George W. Bush, senior advisor to George W., as well as consultant to presidents, governors, senators, Sir Karl Rove. We're going to talk about how to speak so that people actually listen, what is actually going on in politics today, how to sell anything and get what you want, and the science from learning from the most powerful people in the world over the last decades. Subscribe, like, ring the bell on YouTube. I want to make sure that we get in your ear every single week, not all that other noise out there. Thanks for being here. I love this podcast because I love talking to friends about how they made their millions and helping business owners solve their problems. It's fulfilling. I love sharing all the secrets. But when I can't meet in person, there's only one tool I use. It's called Riverside. Riverside ensures I can talk to someone anywhere in the world, recorded in 4K, so the quality of the video matches the quality of the humans you're listening to. Riverside records separate audio and video tracks, so we can easily cut out those awkward interruptions that are my least favorite part of interviews. They have in-platform editing software based off a 99% accurate AI transcription. And if that's not simple enough, they take AI one step further for their show notes. It summarizes your entire content into an SEO-optimized description, and chapters all automatic, saves me a ton of money. So you can use Riverside for podcast interviews, panel discussions, presentations, webinars, more. And best of all, it's simple. Try Riverside for yourself with link in the description. Use code CODY for an exclusive discount. I get a deal, you get a deal. I want to start with maybe something that everybody's thinking today, which is this is the worst time to be alive in American politics. The country's falling apart, and we're barely going to make it without some sort of insurrection or civil war.
Right.
You are a noted historian, if people don't know that, and you would probably quarrel with the word historian, but you've written
I'm not a historian, but I'm not noted. Let me put it that way.
You know, and I think it'd be interesting to hear your perspective on, is this the worst time to be in American politics?
No. It's not. It's bad. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's cheery and wonderful. But even in the lifetimes of people who are around today, like me, it's been worse. You know, the 60s and 70s were terrible. We were deeply divided as a country over the issue of race. We have a bigot running for president in 1968 who wins 5 states. And in 1972, he runs for the Democratic nomination and runs 1.8% behind the ultimate winner, George McGovern, in the popular vote. We have the peaceful protests, mostly peaceful protests of the 1950s, give way in the 1960s to violence. It begins in 1964 and 1963 with the major riots in big cities, Harlem. 1964 and 65, more riots, including Watts. 7 days, the center of our great American city is burning. In 1967 is called the Long Hot Summer. Over 140 American cities are racked with huge protests over race. April of 1968, Martin Luther King is assassinated, gunned down in front of a motel in Memphis, Tennessee, and over 140 American cities burst into flames within a matter of hours, and 47 Americans die. And we have political violence. November 1963, the President of the United States is assassinated in Dallas. April of 68, Martin Luther King is gunned down. 6 weeks later, Robert Kennedy Sr. is gunned down in a hotel in Los Angeles after winning the Democratic primary in California. You know, 1975, Squeaky Fromm is a matter of 4 or 5 feet away from Gerald Ford, pulls out the pistol and pulls the trigger, and the gun misfires. Otherwise, he would have been dead. And in March of 1981, the President of the United States, newly inaugurated president, is shot in front of the Capitol Hilton, and Ronald Reagan nearly dies. We are also deeply divided over an unpopular war in Southeast Asia. Campus protests began in 1965. 35,000 people attempt to storm the Pentagon in 1967 to shut down the war. 10,000 people gather in Grant Park in Chicago in the summer of 68 and attempt to shut down the Democratic Convention. I'm a young kid as a volunteer at the Republican National Convention in 1972 in Miami Beach, and in the midst of tens of thousands of protesters, the President of the United States cannot be motorcaded into the convention center to receive the nomination of his party. He has to be helicoptered in because the access to the convention center is blocked. By 1970, it's routine for campuses to erupt and for governors to call out the National Guard. And in 1970, the governor of Ohio does so, and kids die at Kent State University. And within a matter of hours, 300 American campuses are shut down by an estimated 3 million student protesters. And many of them don't open up again that spring for the balance of the year. We have, we have the country, 2 presidents are forced from office, one over an unpopular war in Southeast Asia, the other one over a, second-rate burglary at the Pentagon. And our politics looks broken. And in 1976, in desperation, we turned to an untested guy, seemed like a good Christian man, Southern moderate Democrat named Jimmy Carter, becomes president. He'll restore dignity and honor to the White House, but he turns out to be weak. He's a good man, but weak. And we have double-digit inflation, double-digit interest rates, and double-digit unemployment. We coined a new term called stagflation. The Russians are on the move. They're moving in Afghanistan. They're moving in Europe. It looks like America is on the downward slope, and we're desperate as a country. We look broken. And we have one debate in the 1980 election, and Jimmy Carter makes the ultimate mistake in the debate of saying that he talked to his 14-year-old about nuclear disarmament. And this guy who's supposed to be way too conservative keeps talking about how he was the governor of the most populous state in the Union, and California had a different reputation then. And he asked the right questions. Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? And is the country more respected today than it was 4 years ago? And we take a chance. And American politics heals. But 1930s, our country is deeply divided. 1 out of every 4 Americans is out of work. We have populists on the left and the right. On the left, it is Huey Long. Every man a king, he screams. Take from them's the got to give them's the don't. And on the right, we have Father Coughlin broadcasting 50,000 watts every night from Detroit all across the country. It's the Jews that have created this economic disaster. One of the leading movements in the country is the America First isolationist movement that says, we don't need to worry about what's going on in Europe and in Asia. It's none of our business. We're protected by the Atlantic and the Pacific. We do not need to come to the aid of those that are standing up to Adolf Hitler or to Tojo. We need to just stay focused here at home. And it's led by one of the most popular figures of the time, the aviator Charles Lindbergh. And we come this close. We come this close to not being prepared for what ultimately comes to our doorstep on December 7th of 1941. And we have 1 million people marching through the streets of New York City in a parade supporting the Communist Party of the United States of America. We have a rally at Madison Square Gardens, packed to the rafters, for the German Bund heralding Adolf Hitler. We're broken. The Gilded Age, it's worse. You think it's bad today? Go back to the Gilded Age, where for 25 years we have divided government. We have 5 presidential elections in a row. Nobody gets 50% of the vote. Nobody. 2 of the elections, the winner wins the Electoral College and loses the popular vote. In 3 elections, the difference between the winner and the loser is less than 1%. And it is we are divided because what happens is we're fighting the Civil War again, only in the halls of Congress. When the Democrats take control of the House of Representatives in 1874, for the first time in 18 years, they do so by flipping 96 Republican seats and making them Democrats. And 56 of those Democrats are former Confederate generals and officials, including the Vice President of the Confederacy, is now sitting in the House of Representatives representing Georgia. And they fight the Civil War all over again and do nothing for 25 years because they hate each other's guts. And we have an election in 1876. Remember the 20 Days from Hell in 2000, where we have 20 days during which we don't really know who the president is? Because we've had an election in November, but before December 6th, there's a controversy over the electoral votes of Florida. In 1876, the winner on election night, 250,000 votes up, is the Democrat governor of New York. But surprisingly, the Democrats claim to have won the votes of South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana. Now, what's strange about that? Because a majority of the eligible voters are black men who are overwhelmingly Republican. So how could the Democrat win those 3 states that have a black majority, overwhelmingly Republican? It was by fraud, intimidation, and murder. And so the U.S. Congress says, there's a controversy over who the electors are from these 3 states. The election depends on that. They say, under the Constitution, we're supposed to take up this issue, but we're going to appoint a special commission of judges to adjudicate who won the votes of those states. On March 2nd of 1877, that commission unanimously awards the votes of those 3 states to the Republican candidate Rutherford B. Hayes, who becomes president of the United States by a vote of 185 to 184 in the Electoral College, and is sworn in as president 2 days later on the constitutionally mandated date of March 4th. Now, politics is screwed up today. Go back then, when these men hated each other. They hated each other. We remember the years leading into the Civil War. 1856, when the first time you took a history course, there's the little woodcut of Sumner, Charles Sumner of Massachusetts, being caned by Preston Brooks, the Democrat. We all see that little one. That's 1856. It's not 4 years, it's 30 years. There's a brilliant book by a woman named Joanne Freeman, a terrific historian, called Field of Blood. And the point she makes is, for 30 years after the election of 1824, it becomes routine for members of Congress to show up on the floor of the House of Representatives armed to the teeth because they hate each other. And they're fighting over issues, not just the enslavement of 4 million of our fellow Americans, but also in 1838, a Democrat from Kentucky kills a Whig from Maine, or maybe it's a Whig from Kentucky kills a Democrat from Maine, in a duel where the argument is banking regulation. So, the election of 1800 ends in a tie in the Electoral College, not between the winner, Thomas Jefferson, and his opponent, John Adams, but between Thomas Jefferson and his running mate, Aaron Burr, because back then you cast 2 votes. The guy got the most votes became president. Number 2 became vice president. Aaron Burr is supposed to tell some of his fellow New Yorkers, be sure and throw your vote away so that Tommy J becomes president. But no. In December of 1800, when the Electoral College meets, it's a tie. It goes to the House of Representatives. Remember, we had 15 votes to select Kevin McCarthy as Speaker? Yeah. There are 36 votes to select the President of the United States in 1801. And on the 36th ballot, Thomas Jefferson is elected president by the intervention of an unlikely figure, Alexander Hamilton, who has earlier written a letter to George Baird, a Federalist congressman from Delaware, the only member of Congress from Delaware, saying, I hate them both. But at least Jefferson has concern for his character, for his reputation, whereas Aaron Burr is a man of extreme ambition and will be held responsible for all the mistakes he made. So take the lesser of 2 evils, go for Jefferson. And on the 36th ballot, Baird takes a walk, convinces his Federalist colleagues from Maryland, South Carolina, and Vermont, who have deadlocked their delegation so it can't vote for either candidate, to take a walk. And on the 36th ballot, Thomas Jefferson is elected president of the United States. So don't tell me that we're screwed up today. We've been screwed up before, but we've always found a way through it. And we'll find a way through it in this as well.
Interesting. Yeah, so I guess Twitter battle's not as bad as actual gunfights.
Yeah.
Slightly less.
Yeah. And remember, there is a price for everything. 4 years after the 36th ballot, Aaron Burr kills Alexander Hamilton in a duel. So there are consequences.
Yeah, that would really up the ratings for Twitter.
Yeah,
people
exactly.
murdering each other because of tweets. Do you think that we just forget history? Is this human nature where after a certain period of time we can no longer emotionally relate to history?
Sure.
Or we actually don't know it? Why do
I think it's both. I think it's both. But it's normal. I mean, we go through a period and then we enter another period, and it's the natural progression. People who have actually lived during these periods, ultimately die. And so the knowledge of, can you imagine somebody who was on a college campus in 1970 and saw kids killed at Kent State, or somebody who lived in Memphis, Tennessee in 1968 and remembers, there are people, in the older audiences, you can say, do you remember where you were in November 1963? And everybody remembers, but our memory slides as time passes.
Yeah. And now with the advent of information technology coming at us so quickly, you can find yourself really worked up from events that you can't actually touch or see or feel. Yeah.
Well, that's another thing, though, that it's important to keep in context. We've been through that before as well.
Interesting.
Can you think about the moment in 1844 where information stopped traveling at 3 miles an hour and began traveling at the speed of light with the telegraph? Used to be that it took 3, which is basically how fast a horse would walk from Boston to New Orleans. It would take 3 miles an hour to get that information. And now suddenly, with the advent of the telegraph information, that's Samuel Morse, the inventor, was called the Lightning Man, because suddenly you knew information travel. Imagine what it was like when we went from maybe 100 newspapers to several hundreds of newspapers in the 1840s, and then thousands of newspapers by the 1870s with the invention of cheap printing presses, for rotary presses for newspapers. At one point, there were 18 daily newspapers in the city of New York. Imagine how much information changes, the collection of information with the adoption of the transatlantic cable. Now suddenly we know the world. Imagine what happens when radio comes along, what happens when television comes along, what happens when the internet comes along, what happens when, these little devices that we now carry around, when this pops up. So we've been through this moment where increasing fragmentation of our sources of information. And particularly today with social media, I mean, we are slicing and dicing 330 million Americans into lots of different groups where we get our information in lots of different ways.
So what do you think about when people then say, this is the end of the American era? The American dream is dead.
If you travel, I bet. And the American dream is real to people. I was in Abuja, Nigeria, and the cab driver says, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Texas." He said, "Oh, America." He says, I want the American dream. I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "You can dream big." I was in New York recently and got in a car. And when I travel, people don't have a sign that says Karl Rove because sometimes they get abused. So it had the name of my agent on it. And so I got in the car and he said, "You're the Bushman. You're the Bushman." And he said, I love Bush. And I said, "Well, tell me a little bit about you." He said, "I was a peasant in Taiwan, and I came here with nothing." And he said, I have two children. One is I think a healthcare professional. One is some kind of a sophisticated Wall Street type. And I said, "And you drive a car. You drive a limo." He said, "This is my second job." He says, "I do this so that I can provide for my grandchildren's education." And he said, I love America." He said, "I came here with nothing." He said, "Only in America."
It's true.
So no, you bet against us, and you're going to come up short.
I like that. Isn't it true that in parts of Africa, the Bush's first names are some of the most popular names for children? I heard that statistic. Is that true?
Well, I don't know if it's true, but I do know this. I was on that same trip in Nigeria. The guy came up and introduced himself to me, and he said, "I am a governor of the state in the Delta region of Africa." And he said, "Do you know what the most common birth names are for young men and young boys and girls in my part of Nigeria?" And I said, "I have no idea whatsoever." He said, "George and Laura." He said, "Tell America thank you for PEPFAR, for saving our people." 25 million people alive today because of the generosity of the United States. And, it was George W. Bush was a vehicle to do that, but it was an expression of America. We did this after World War II. It was we saved a continent that had been ravaged by war, and then with PEPFAR, we're saving a continent that was ravaged by disease.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was reading a statistic the other day that America has the highest level by like 23 percentage points on average of, I don't know if the right word was happiness, but let's say happiness or excitement for those who earn and win. Right. Whereas in other countries, there are a lot of people on our varying businesses that are immigrants. And they say one of the reasons that they come to America is not just that it's easier for you to win, for sure, but also that there's a culture of appreciation for the ability to earn and win.
Well, part of it is, I think, because in America, people, in other countries, it might be you become rich because you've got a lobbyist and a loophole and a buddy in government. Here it's, you come up with a brilliant idea and work your ass off.
Yeah, that's right. Now, you have a fascinating background and have been, at the epicenter of numerous presidential elections, gubernatorial elections, congressional elections. And there's this one story I found and I thought was so interesting that is relevant maybe for people today, because I think today, in some ways, we're a little softer speaking than we've been. We don't give as much feedback, and especially sometimes we don't speak truth to power in organizations. And I have this story about in 1982, the governor of Texas, Clements, loses his reelection campaign, but then goes to win the next campaign.
1986, yeah.
Do you have a photographic memory?
No.
You have a wild recollection of stats.
Yeah. It's an obsession. It's what my brain is wired weirdly.
Interesting. Yeah, I remember I was at your house for one of your political events, and somebody asked you something about some race at some time, and you just rattled off every single district and what the points were you won or lost by. Does your wife ever go, Karl, please stop?
Yeah, she does. She says, you're an idiot, she says. Stop
She's like, can we talk about the weather or something? Yeah, it makes sense. Okay, so I found a strategy memo that you wrote to Clements on the eve of his election, and you basically gave really harsh feedback. You're like, voters see you as arrogant. You know, among the politicos, there's a belief you won't listen, shoot from the hip, and can be mean and insensitive. And correlation is not causation, but it sounds like you helped him win. How do you get powerful people to listen to you saying the quiet part out loud?
Yeah, well, that was a weird circumstance. Clements had, I'd been close to Clements in my 20s. He had made me his deputy chief of staff. And we had a great relationship, but he was a tough character. He never graduated from college, came from a wealthy family that went bust in the Depression, was forced to drop out of SMU, goes to work as literally a roustabout in the oil fields of South Texas.
What's a roustabout?
Well, he's a guy who literally is one of the common laborers on a drilling rig, on a rig, and which gave him an understanding of ordinary people. Because here's a guy from Highland Park, Texas, Tony suburb of Dallas, who suddenly his family's so broke he's got to go help support the family by doing the hardest work some of the hardest work you could ever do. Anyway, he had said, I went to him as the 1986 campaign approached, and several people were talking about running, and they were talking to me about helping him on their campaign. I went to see him, and he said, I'm not running. So then, so I threw in with another candidate and said to him, if Clements changes his mind and wants me to be involved, I got to go, because he literally set me into business. When I started my company, he was my first client. And then the other candidate, I agreed that was never going to happen. But if it did, so be it. Well, I was on a company retreat at the little, hippie place up in the hill country, and this was a pre-cell phone. And the guy comes in and says, I got Governor Clements is on the line for you. And I have no idea to this day how he found me. But I go take him, and he says, I'm going to run for governor, and I've declared this morning, and I want you to help me. And I was like, I didn't have a choice. But so I thought to myself, I better tell him what he's facing. I mean, it was like, I'm not going to go along just for the ride. If he's in this and I'm stuck in it, I'm going to win. And the only way to do that is to be blunt. And so I told him what I thought needed to be done. And somebody sent me a copy of that memo. They were going through papers, Clements' papers, and found it and sent me a copy of it. And I remembered it, but I did not remember. Clements had this habit of, if he read something, he'd put a check mark and his initial C at the top, in the top right-hand corner, and then he would put some check marks elsewhere where there were things that he agreed. And so he took it. And not a lot of people in politics can take it with the bark off. And my feeling is that people who tend to be successful, really successful in really hard politics, have that ability. And he was one of them. And he also had a terrific wife who understood politics. She'd been Republican National Committee woman, and she understood practical politics. And so I suspect that one of the reasons that the memo was effective was that it said things that she had already told him. And so I was reinforcing what Rita had said, and that was that helps carry the day.
So you think one of the keys to winning in politics or in general is an ability to hear something really tough about yourself,
right,
internalize it and change it, and not make emotional pleas.
Right. And it also, but behind that is something else, which is you have to create an environment in which people can consistently say, with all due respect, I disagree. And Clements was a tough guy, but he had the ability to listen. But really, I saw this really with George W. Bush when he was president, because one of the things I became aware of was none of the easy decisions show up in the Oval Office. All those get settled elsewhere. And when somebody is sitting in behind that big desk, they have to have people who walk in and can lay out the different options that they have, pluses and minuses, and then let the president, make the decision and then support that decision. But you have to create an environment in which people are not pulling their punches publicly and trying to solve it privately behind the scenes, or I want to be the last person that talks to the president. That's really not helpful. And so what I saw was Bush, people, think of him, geez, simple guy, son of his dad. He's the history major from Yale and the Harvard MBA. And he thought very carefully about this, first as governor and then as president, and worked hard to create an environment which people would walk in and say, you know what, I disagree. And I got a different opinion, and here's my opinion. And that's hard to do, and particularly if you're president. I'd have people sitting in my office, member of Congress, you're a bunch of idiots, and Secretary so-and-so is a buffoon, and what you're trying to do on this issue. If I had 5 minutes with the president, I'd tell him how bad this is and what we got to do to set it right. And I'd say, you know what, there's a little time on his schedule here. Why don't we just peek in and see if he can see you? And, Mr. President, you haven't been to see Congress. How, Mr. President, how are you? How's Barney? How's Laura? Dude, you look great, Mr. President. No, not. And it just overwhelmed them. But Bush understood that, and he tried very hard and succeeded in getting people to, you'd have some junior G person from the Department of Widgets and Gadgets on one couch and Condi Rice on the other, and they'd be talking about something with different viewpoints. And if you did a good job and you walked out as you got ready to walk out of the Oval, he'd peer over his glasses and say, you did really good today. And that, he did lots of things that created an environment which people said, I got a different view, can I lay it out?
Yeah, I think that the smartest deal makers I've ever met are often from a place like Texas, have a little drawl, say something up front like, well, I'm just a simple man from Texas, and proceed to murder you.
Exactly.
So I think a lot of times people mistake charisma for intelligence. And if you can have the right people surrounding you, then I'm not sure IQ actually translates as much to success as people like to say.
Well, I think you have to be pretty darn smart, but being pretty darn smart means you realize you're not going to be right all the time. And
that's true.
And you can be smarter if they're smart. If the smarter the people around you, the smarter you are. So.
Well, let's talk about this. I think this is one of the things that you're probably most famous for. Many among them. You've written a few books. I really enjoyed the book on McKinley.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. A lot of fun.
Not covered very much.
No.
And just a fascinating segment of history.
Yeah.
And
the first modern president.
Right.
Overshadowed by the guy that he rescued from oblivion and put him on a path to being the figure that we know today, Theodore Roosevelt.
Right. So, yeah, it's almost like, I guess the winners do write history, but also you need a really good PR man.
Yeah, and look, the historians that came after the turn of the century were progressives and liked the notion of Theodore Roosevelt, and McKinley was too nice. I mean, he really is a reformer. I mean, the things that when Roosevelt takes over, one of the things that he does to settle the country, because the country is, we've lost Abraham Lincoln in 1865. We now lost in 1901 McKinley, who's the last Civil War veteran to serve as president. And the country is, we have no sense of, 500,000 people line the railroad tracks from Buffalo to Washington, D.C. There are so many people who jam the station. 30,000 people show up at the station in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, that the governor of Pennsylvania cannot force his way through the crowd to pay his respects to Mrs. McKinley. And when the train begins to pull out of the station, people begin singing patriotic songs. It plows into the station in Baltimore through a couple hundred yards of flowers that have been strewn on the tracks. When the reporters are writing as they pull out of Baltimore for Washington on the final run, it's dusk and the sun is setting, and the tracks are lit by fires along the railroad track. Mostly poor black farmers standing there next to the fires, hats off, saluting their former president. And when he is taken and buried, the school children of Nashville, Tennessee have collected pennies, nickels, and dimes to send a train car load of sweet pea flowers, which are strewn on the streets leading into the cemetery, and several thousand grizzled Civil War veterans dressed in their old uniforms stop and pick up the flowers and put them in their lapels. And the entire cabinet is sitting there, many of them weeping, and one man stands apart, and he stands apart because he's afraid that if he sits with his colleagues, he will be overcome by emotion. So Theodore Roosevelt stands apart, and in order to calm the country, he says, I will continue the policies of our predecessor. It's an amazing guy. But historians who came afterwards said, we're tired of that generation. We want the new young progressive. And even though Roosevelt is following in many instances the policies laid down by his predecessor. He gets the writing, and McKinley didn't.
Well, that gives me the chills. You are obviously known for the President George W. Bush legacy, and for not just getting him into the presidency, but also into the governorship. And, through that, you had multiple wins, multiple losses, and
a lot more of the former than the latter.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, you did. Well, I think, who is it? Naval always says you only need one big you only need one big win to get rid of all the other losses. Yeah. Do you remember a moment where you thought you might lose the presidency when you were first starting with George W.? Because it seems in retrospect like it was naturally going to happen.
Yeah.
But do you remember like a dark night?
Oh, yeah, New Hampshire. Yeah. We that morning we got the early morning exits, and we were getting our ass kicked, and it was clear we were not going to win. And I thought this could be the end. And Bush called everybody together and said, "We're going to have a bad night tonight, and it's on me, and not you. So I want everybody to know that I have confidence in you. Let's take a day or two off. I want everybody to think about what we need to do different and how we're going to get back." We had 19 days until South Carolina. And to me, that was leadership, because the normal candidate would have been raging and angry, and how did this happen? And instead his was, I know, we didn't give them a reason to vote for us here. And so we got to do it different. But it's me. And, sometimes you can get away with firing your entire staff. Reagan did it after New Hampshire, fired his staff. Yeah. But if you're going to win, ultimately you have to lead a team. And Bush said, "I have confidence in my team," and of course went on to win South Carolina, and with it the nomination.
You get to see behind the scenes a lot of big political characters. Is that so abnormal? Like, would they really typically rage and not?
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, the anger is mostly an unconstructive emotion inside a political campaign. So no, I've seen that, and that ain't helpful.
Yeah, you've also seen a lot of good and bad leaders. Are there other leaders that maybe people don't think about who have been exceptional when it comes to being somebody out front, but maybe we don't recognize them for that?
Yeah. Well, there's lots of great leaders, and we've seen them. I mean, one of the most interesting things to me was, Ronald Reagan was a great communicator, and we always attributed it to great speechwriters. So-and-so came up with, tear down that wall, and somebody else came up with Star Wars, etc. But one of the interesting things, Marty Anderson was his domestic policy chief, and Marty was at Stanford. And after Reagan's presidency, he set out to find the answer to a big question that Reagan devotees: who wrote the radio addresses? Reagan loses the nomination in 1976, but has a radio program after he leaves the governor's office. And the question, and they were great. They were these little short, 3-minute, 5-minute little speeches by Reagan, and they were on, every week, and they went for a couple of years. So you're talking several hundred of these. But the question was, who wrote them? So Anderson got one of his, I think, grad students to go through the Reagan archives, and sure enough, found the scripts, which were on yellow pad paper, and they were in Reagan's handwriting. Reagan wrote them, and then he would go through and scratch out things, and if need be, rewrite them entirely. And then, he was literally editing up to the moment he sat there on the. But here are these, they're taking complex conservative ideas and simplifying them in a way that ordinary people can get their hands around them, and conveying them in powerful imagery and common sense words and practical thinking. And it was him. And to me, that said, because every president can get a good speechwriter. Yep. Every president can get a teleprompter.
Not all of them can read it.
All of them can read it, and many times they can even make sense when they read it. But there was the workings, and we got to see his mind. We got to take a look at, here was his rough draft, and here's what he was next to final, and then when we look at the little hand scratchings on it, here was his final. And so yeah, we don't get those many insights anymore with the way that we organize things, but and can collect information. We don't have voluminous papers like Jefferson and others had. But
no. But did you have, I can't remember, for Bush's campaigns, were there moments where you thought, wow, we've really distilled the complex and the overly sophisticated down to the...
Yeah, compassion and conservatism.
You guys came up with that too.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
Well, there was a guy named Marvin Olasky who was teaching at UT, lived on the east side of town, the bad part of town, and was a devout Christian and was concerned with what we call mediating structures. The conservative theologian Michael Novak, Catholic theologian Michael Novak. But these are the little battalions of Edmund Burke. These are the things in between the state and the individual that help us live our lives. And Olasky and to a lesser extent Michael Novak had written about the role of these mediating structures, and Bush was very taken with it. And so compassion conservatism was an attempt to say we as conservatives can be compassionate, but we don't need to rely upon the hand of big government to deliver. We can organize things in such a way that we encourage these mediating structures, whether it's church, whether it's community groups, whether it's social action groups, to step in and play this role of caring for every person like we'd like to be cared for ourselves. And but it was a way to say I'm a different kind of conservative. We were coming off of this era where conservatism was defined primarily by opposition to Bill Clinton, and particularly over the Monica Lewinsky situation, which had sort of blown up in our faces. And Bush wanted to say, I'm a different kind of Republican, and here's one of the things that I want to do, which is unleash faith-based and community-based organizations to confront these problems that we have as a society.
Brilliant. And do you feel like conservatives today are still thought of as compassionate? Is there a segment?
No. When we have Marjorie Taylor Greene saying we must stop AIDS relief effort in Africa because we've got bigger problems here at home, it's just not thoughtful. We spend a relative pittance of what this country has on saving lives, human lives. I thought we were pro-life. And the expenditure of a modest amount of money has saved an enormous number of lives. And so, yeah, I don't know. We've got conservatism is today in flux. And it's because in part success. Both parties are suffering through this, liberalism and conservatism, Democrats and Republicans. But, we each in our own way have been successful at certain things. The Democratic Party had become the party of civil rights. We've become the party of, limited government. And, we've succeeded at certain things. And it's caused, us to figure out what's next. And so we have populism, populists like her who want to basically isolate us from the world and then spend our money in rewarding our constituencies. It's like I saw Steve Bannon the other day who was talking about how during the battle over the tax cut bill, he wanted to raise taxes so it was 50% on the top bracket. Didn't want to lower it. He wanted to raise it because government ought to be able to take away 50% of what anybody makes. And my theory is if you can take it from some people, you can take it from anybody.
Yep.
And
rich doesn't have a great definition.
Yeah. And the point at which you become rich also has something, that's open to definition.
Yeah, I mean, that's the right audience for this. We're all about, efficient use of capital, and you typically want to give, it's just like in a business, if you think about government, it's so fascinating. It's really the only entity where power is determined by how much money you spend, not how much money you make. I couldn't imagine running a business like that. Everybody would be fired. It'd be like, this whole group is fired. And yet we don't really think about what the incentive structure is or what wags the dog. That must be frustrating after you've been in the highest levels of power, the deputy chief of staff to the president of the United States of America, and then leaving that power. Is that really hard? What was that like?
Well, first of all, it was time to go, and look, you better not be vested in that moment. You know, as a human being, we all have experiences, and if you stay stuck in something, whether it was a great experience or a bad experience, it's bad. And so I was grateful for the opportunity. Look, I was there a long time. The average tenure of a senior White House aide is 18 months. I was there 7 years. So I enjoyed it. It was hard. I liked hard work. I had hair, and it wasn't gray when I went there. And but it was time. And you better not stay stuck there. I look back now and say that was a great experience, high point of my life. And God, think about how wonderful it's been since. The things I get to write for the world's greatest newspaper every Thursday. I get to go on Fox TV 5.1 times a week. I get to go give speeches. I get to write books. I get to, travel. I get to learn interesting things. I get to be involved in interesting things. I get to pick and choose, not because I need to do that in order to make a living, but because I get to do that because I want to advance a cause, and I get to do it as a volunteer. So it was great, and yes, there was a period of adjustment, but I have colleagues who are still stuck, and I feel sad for them.
Do you think a lot of politicians stay stuck, and that's why we have I don't know, not to call out names, but a Nancy Pelosi that's there forever?
Yeah.
Way past the point of return? What happened?
Yeah. Well, look, I got to tell you, I have to, let me speak, this will sound odd. She was effective right up to the moment she gave up her speakership. Now, I am surprised she stayed a year, she's withdrawn. And I think it's that she has served a very valuable role in mentoring, if you will, her chosen successor, Hakeem Jeffries. But what I really worry about are these people who, Strom Thurmond, I mean, he was just not there. And, it was like a very sophisticated, senior care program. There's a difference. I mean, Chuck Grassley, he's all there. Yeah. But there are people that are sort of burned out, and it's time to move on. And but everybody gets to make a choice.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think the other part that's interesting is in business you have such set KPIs. Right. And you understand why this actually happens, one reason or not. But I remember one time I was in China doing some business. And they had at that time, I'm not sure if they called them governors, but, governor of a particular region. And they had, they had direct KPIs. It was largely focused on economics. So it was like GDP growth, I think, unemployment, maybe 2 or 3 more. And if they hit those KPI metrics and grew, then they were scored well. Right. And they left a few things out, like the environment. And so they had, sort of their reversion. But I always wondered, why is there no scoreboard or KPI for government in the U.S.? Is that just impossible to do?
Well, yeah, because remember, in China, the head of the Communist Party sets those for you. We don't have that similar top-down management here, and I'm glad we don't.
Really, why?
Because at the end of the day, you touched on it. You're going to grow this many jobs, blah 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 blah, but we don't care what happens over here. Mm-hmm. I like it when the people get to decide and express it from the bottom up. Yeah. And sometimes they're far more liberal than I would like in Massachusetts. Sometimes they're, different, just come out with different conclusions than I would. But I feel better about it than having one guy sitting up at the top. Because think about it, do we really today have any confidence whatsoever in any economic number that comes out of China? Oh, no, because they all got into a system of organized deceit, because if I wanted to remain the governor of whatever province, I had to hit those marks, and whatever was necessary to hit those marks, which might be building up an enormous amount of debt over real estate, because that was the easiest way to put people to work and grow my economy, so be it. But now the chickens are coming home to roost. Yeah. And also we find out that there's, it's sort of institutionalized corruption, because you had to hit those markers. Because you had to. There was one guy who was going to decide whether you stayed or went, and it wasn't the people of your province; it was the boss.
Yeah, that we definitely do not want.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of which, watching the debate was fascinating. And there was a lot of...
That's one way of putting it. One way. Horrifying might be another word ending in ing.
Yeah, you were on Fox News afterwards commentating on it, and I want to talk about a few things there. But one, I'm confused somehow. It seems like every presidential debate, they both, quote unquote, lie about a lot of things. Like, they don't use real numbers. And I have to imagine, take cognitive ability out of it if they're just forgetful. Why do they do that? Why don't they just use real numbers? Does it not affect their ability to get voted?
Well, look, I think it's gotten worse. I don't think this has been it used to be, for whatever reason, we sort of help people to account for all the, but now so much is said by both major party candidates that is, undeniably wrong, that we just sort of say, okay, well, that's what they do. Yeah. Not healthy, though.
Yeah, bizarre. I always wonder, I get massacred on Twitter if I accidentally mess up one number. But when it comes to politicians, I suppose, since we've seen the trust level decline to so low of levels, we just assume both are liars and we somehow vote along party lines.
Right.
Fascinating. Okay.
Well, we've largely voted upon party lines. The interesting thing is that the number of people who identify as independents has grown, though a lot of them are, in essence, operationally Democrats or Republicans. But the number of swing voters has declined, but it makes it more important because the two parties are relative parity. So if the shrinking pool of people who are really up for grabs, they have a bigger impact on the outcome of the election.
Interesting. So, for instance, that leads me to RFK and his, what was he calling it, the real debate. What do you think about that? Was that a good idea, a bad idea?
It was an attempt to get attention. It didn't get much attention. It might have gotten more attention had the other debate been more traditional. But look, third-party candidates are, they're the successful ones. By success, I mean they have an impact on the outcome of the general election in a clear, measurable fashion, is because they've got a consistent platform that somehow, I'm Jill Stein. I'm the Green Party candidate, and here's my Green Party agenda. Or I'm Joe Jurgensen, the Libertarian Party candidate. Here's my very limited government platform. RFK is trying to apply to both wings of the political spectrum. I am the environmental wild man, and I'm the vaccine denier. Mm-hmm. And I've got all kinds of crazy theories over here. 5G causes cancer. That kind of thing. So I'm dubious that he's going to have a big impact on the election. Now, that's because he's going to be more like Evan McMillan, who ran in 2016 and got on 20 some odd state ballots and got votes in 30 some odd states, and less like Jill Stein, who was on 50 state ballots in 2016 and got more votes in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania than Hillary Clinton lost those states by. Or Jurgensen, who was on the Libertarian ballot in all 50 states and got more votes in Arizona, Wisconsin, and Georgia than Donald Trump lost those states by. So third-party candidates, in essence, could be said to have helped Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump lose the elections in 2016 and 2020.
Yeah. So you obviously, what I love about the way you think about the world is how mathematical you are. And, it's not very emotional. You're like, I don't really care what you think one way or the other. Here's what I think the numbers are going to do for us, which is really how you should look at business, and also probably if you want to win elections. What do you think about if you vote for RFK, and take whether you like RFK out or not you, but anybody listening, is that just throwing away your vote? Because that has basically little to no impact on
it decides the election.
Interesting.
Because otherwise, if you've been forced to pick one of the other two, you might have decided the election for them. Yeah. So it's sort of like what that is you are basically saying neither one of these two is worthy of my vote, but I still want to participate in the process. And then if push came to shove, if I were not allowed a third-party choice and I wanted to participate, then I'd take the lesser of two evils. Yeah. But where I'm allowed to vote for neither one of them if I think neither one of them is worthy of the office.
Yeah, interesting. So one of the other things I want to talk about is there's obviously a lot going on online about the most recent debate. You called it an unmitigated disaster. Right. And, when we were talking, we were both kind of saying, we were both a little surprised, even, to the degree. Yeah. Talk to me about what you think about the debate and whatever you're comfortable talking about with the current two candidates that there is.
Well, I thought I was. Neither man had a good night. It's just that Biden had a really, 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 really bad night. Yeah. It's not that Trump had a great debate. I mean, he failed to prosecute the issues. He'd say, immigration, border. But it would have been a lot more powerful if he had said, "Here are 3 things I want to do." Because we'd say, I want to return to Mexico policy like I had before, and I want to do this and I want to do that. So we had a sense he had a second act in it. When it came to inflation and cost of living, it's one thing to say they're up. It's another thing to say, and you know what? Here's the reason why, and here's what I'm going to do differently. And so, but he won. No ifs, ands, or buts, because the other guy lost badly. I mean, it was shocking. It was painful to watch. We've all seen somebody in our family, grapple with the ravages of age. And we all, age at a different rate. And we all have different histories. I mean, people forget. In 1988, Joe Biden nearly died because of an aneurysm. He's had 2 aneurysms. Mm-hmm. And you cannot tell me that didn't leave that didn't affect something to do with how his brain operates at this age. But no, it was painful to watch. I mean, and painful for our country. I think we used to feel better. We used to be in a place where a significant number of us said, you know what, no matter who wins, I think the country's going to be in good hands. And now we think, oh my God, no matter who wins, we're not going to be in good hands. Yeah. And that's not healthy.
You've been sort of behind the scenes with politics throughout this, Biden administration and far before it. What do you think about, did a lot of people know his rate of decline?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, that's the thing is, and this criticism is, now people are popping up saying I was in meetings and I was worried. I've been worried for a couple of years. I mean, I thought I was saying a year and a half ago, I cannot imagine why he's running again. I mean, he's in bad shape now and he's only going to get worse. And so literally, Jill Biden and Valerie Biden Owens, his sister, wife and sister, are the 2 most powerful people in affecting him. And for their own reasons, they've decided we want Joe to remain and to run. And it's not going to be good for him. Yeah. It's not going to be, if he were to win, it'd be terrible for the country, but he's going to lose. And so they're going to be sort of, you had a chance to step aside to be we all thought he was going to be a transitional figure. That's how he got elected. I'm going to end the chaos. I'm the transitional guy. There are lots of new people coming up, younger people, but it's me versus him. I've got the responsibility of ending his political career, serving as a transitional figure, and then we can go to a bright future. No. I'm the only one who can defeat Donald Trump is what I think he's saying to himself. But no, it's I don't know if the reports are true, but they said the reports of the family meeting at Camp David this weekend is one of the strongest voices for staying in was Hunter Biden.
Oh, Lord, that's a terrible
yeah. Let's count on that guy's good judgment. I don't need to pay my taxes. I can have an affair with my brother's widow. I can spend massive amounts of money on illicit drugs and a gun and prostitutes, and I can go into business in Ukraine, having no experience in corporate governance, energy, or Ukraine, but I can get $80,000 a month, and it's going to look really good.
Oh, all I can just picture is honestly the scarf. And
please.
That's for you. That's my present to you today.
Please.
Just wanted to place that for you. But so why, if I always try to think second and third order effects. So if so many people realized his cognitive decline within their own party, and they knew he was going to go on stage, and they I think assumed that something like this might happen, why continue to back it? Don't they look foolish?
I think they hoped against hope that he would be, State of the Union Joe.
Yeah.
That he'd show up and that he'd be good. They'd be okay.
Yeah.
And if I don't think anybody thought if it goes bad, it's going to go this bad.
Right.
I mean, it was just horrific.
Yeah, it makes it very hard. I think as a normal human who's not involved in politics, it just completely makes you lose trust in not only the mainstream media, which I think is worth us talking about, but certainly the political system. And so I was reading the other day this Pew study that shows that for the first time ever, we're seeing that people under 30 believe social media at the same level that they believe mainstream media. And it looks like we're only about, 10 to 20 points off for most other age ranges. And that, to my knowledge, has never happened before. What do you think's happening there?
Well, we're seeing the fragmentation of the media.
Yeah.
Now, we've seen fragmentation before. I mean, we've gone from relatively small number of sources to a large number of sources to an extraordinary large number of printed sources to electronic sources to visual sources to the internet to cable TV. We've seen the fragmentation, and this is continuing it. But yeah, social media. I'm trying to understand the impacts of social media. In fact, David Axelrod and I exchange articles about the fragmentation and the impact and so forth. And in a lot of it, the algorithms are rewarding bad behavior. Say ugly things, get retweeted. People say the most extraordinary things in order to draw attention to themselves. There's a book written a long time ago by Daniel Boorstin, who was the Librarian of Congress, called The Pseudo-Event. And the pseudo-event American politics. And he's talking about the 1950s and 60s. And he's talking about the creation of things for the purpose of attracting attention. And he's talking about the corrosive influence that has on democratic values. Well, that was when we were talking about, PR agents and stunts for local news. And now we're talking about, an infinite number of channels of social media influencers attempting to gain attention for themselves in order to monetize it.
Yeah. I mean, we can see it firsthand since we have a pretty large media company. We can see everybody A/B tests their titles, right? And so when we're testing titles during a period of fear, which we usually determine just by economic, like what's happening in the economy, fear-based economy as opposed to greed-based economy, post 2020 versus today. Today we're in a fear-based economy. And so if you use a subject line that is negative in some way, shape, or form, or kind of gnarly or mean, you can see sometimes somewhere between 20 and almost 50% increase same content, but just with a gnarly slant as opposed to a positive slant. And so I think you're absolutely right. One thought I have around that is, do you think, what happens with mainstream media channels going forward? Because there is, at least theoretically, some sort of, there's a screen, right? They can have Karl Rove on there, who's actually been behind the scenes of presidential campaigns and really understands what's happening. Or you can have the 21-year-old who's really good at social media, but actually knows nothing about politics as the main source. What do you think happens in the future? Do we just...
I can't forecast. I'm trying to figure it out. I mean, I do, because on the one hand, also the other thing that traditional media have is an editor.
Right.
Who says, and fact checkers.
Yeah.
And that seems, almost, and they have books where they describe how what are the rules. Yeah. And then we don't have a rule book. We don't have a style book. We don't have editors. We don't have fact checkers. We've got, somebody going on and saying, what is the most extraordinarily wild thing that I can say that will attract me more retweets, more viewers, more listeners, more likes.
We need to get you on Instagram. Instagram's nicer. Twitter's a place for meanies. It is a mean.
I have like 650,000 Twitter followers. I do not read my
my
feed.
Don't do it. Don't go to the comments.
Yeah. No.
You never have?
I did for a while, and then said, "Why am I wasting my time on this?"
You start drinking too much.
I don't drink, so I don't have that. I don't have the ability to salve my woes that way.
So what do you do?
I remain happy.
Shove them down and aside.
No, just ignore it. Just ignore it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Even when you were in highly stressful situations inside of the presidency or now in your campaigns, do you have an outlet for how you approach stress?
I read. I have friends. I have a great family. I have a terrific dog. I have the world's greatest dog.
You have a very cute dog.
Yes. Yeah. Doc Holliday.
I forgot that was the name.
Doc Holliday Rove.
Yeah. That seems very wholesome and healthy.
Yeah,
I have friends and I hang out with my family.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the right answer.
Exactly.
Okay. So who do you think is going to win the presidential election?
The election where today it would be Trump.
Yeah.
And if Biden remains on the ticket, I think it will be Trump. If they swap him out, it'll be a horse race.
How does that make you feel about the swap? Does that feel like they took the democratic process out by not allowing constituents to actually elect the...
Yeah, they won't have primary results, but they'll have delegates, and the party will have to step in and make it. Delegates will have to make a choice.
Do you get conspiracy theory ever and think this was the plan all along?
No. I just, This says, one, people in the White House knew about this and didn't talk about it. Leaders of the Democratic Party knew about it and they didn't see a way around it. And when they were given an option, the option was too weak. An unknown congressman from Minnesota.
Yeah. Who do you think they hot swap them for?
If they do hot swap them, I don't know, but it won't be Newsom.
Thank God. Whoops. I
Yeah.
don't know if I should say that. That's my opinion. That guy's awful. We left California because of
So
he's a nice
yeah,
man.
and look, California's got a bad reputation, so the Democrats understand that. They're not going to.
Interesting.
And also, they have a 12th Amendment problem.
Yeah.
You cannot replace Kamala Harris. She's going to be the running mate of whoever.
Yeah.
And you can't cast California's votes for a president and a vice presidential candidate from the same state. So can't have a California governor and a California senator, now California vice president, to be on the same ticket.
Interesting.
So I don't know, but they got a bunch of people. Polis of Colorado wants to run. Whitmer of Michigan, who might be the front runner. Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota. Cory Booker, the governor of North Carolina. Roy Cooper, the governor of Kentucky. Andy Beshear. Gina Raimondo, the commerce secretary. Murphy, the governor of New Jersey, though he's got real problems at home. Mm-hmm. There'll be a mini boomlet if it were to happen by some of the Clinton people for Mitch Landrieu. So, I don't know. And I do know this. First of all, I'm pretty confident it wouldn't be an acrimonious process, because people would say, you know what, this is a weird circumstance. If I look like I'm I've got a sharp knife and I'm going after the other people, then it ain't going to look good for me in the short run, and it'll be bad for me in the long run. And this is going to be a high wire act. And if I don't get the nomination, then I want to be in a position where if we win, I've got a shot to get in. And if we lose, I don't want to have ruined my opportunity for 2028. And so I think everybody be dropping Oppo packages on the media and hoping the media would do the dirty work for them. But I think people would recognize under the short time frame that they got to try and cobble together. We'd see lots of endorsement. Who can I get to come out and say nice things about me? What positive things can I say that will attract normal Democrats? We'll go to the Democratic Convention. Out of the 3,900 and some odd delegates, all but 100 have been slated by the Biden campaign. So this is not going to be 45% Bernie bros and Democratic socialists. It's going to be normal Democrats. They're going to go to the convention. Nobody would have a majority on the first ballot. And on the second ballot and every ballot thereafter, the House of Lords now gets to vote, the Democratic super delegates. So Donna Brazile and all these people who've been active for years in the Clinton, Obama, Biden administration, the Democratic leaders, they get to vote, which means it's more likely to be a normal Democrat and being chosen on the basis of who can win. And they'd have an interesting convention. We'd all be watching it. It'd be really interesting. We'd have speeches. We'd take the judge and take the measure of these people. Somebody would win, and for the next week, between then and Labor Day, the entire country would say, who is that person? And how do we get to know them better? And they would be smart enough to be running around the country, laying out positive things, laying out their agenda, saying things that would cause us to say, well, you know what? That person has what it takes. When Nikki Haley was looking like she had a shot, she started to be included in some of the national polls. What if it was Joe Biden versus Nikki Haley? Mm-hmm. And she was up by double digits. Mm-hmm. And what did we know about her? Not a hell of a lot. All we knew was, seems well-spoken, was the ambassador to the UN, was governor of one of those southern states, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, one of them bad down there. And she seemed like she got a head on her shoulders, and boy, she's really, she's a role model.
Yeah.
And we're for her, mm-hmm. which is an expression how desperate the country was for something other than a rerun.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't look like they're going to get that, most likely.
Yeah, exactly.
When you are called into some of these campaigns, do you also help with ads and how they position themselves with marketing?
Yeah, no. If I get, I get it. How do you go about doing this?
Yeah.
So I'm not the ad maker, but it's like, here's what the things that are important for you to be doing, and defining yourself, and being able to articulate a message and so forth. It's
so like, say Tom is running for a big governorship. Tom calls you and says, can you help me think about how to win this? And you say, let me run the numbers?
No, I say, why are you running? Mm. What matters to you?
Uh-huh.
What do you think people are really concerned about? And also, what are you really concerned about? Mm. Because we've got these movies about politics. The Candidate, with Robert Redford, and so forth. And the general theory behind him, Wag the Dog. The general theory behind him is the masses are asses. All we got to do is contrive some kind of a cute ad and depict our candidate in an attractive way, and then we win the voters. And it's more that ain't the case. In fact, the best analogy is the emperor's new clothes. Particularly if you're running for president, you're going to be buck naked at the end of that parade, and they're going to see it all the warts, and you got to hope that they say, you know what, you're looking at the best you can look on that day. And so authenticity matters. So, these people who say, well, what do I need to talk about in my campaign? I can say, well, big issues today are immigration and cost of living. But and you got to be prepared to talk about those, and you better care about what your answers are. But what do you really care about, particularly when you run for governor?
Yeah.
When Bush ran for governor, he ran on 4 big issues: educating, making sure that every child learned to read by the 4th grade, education reform. Welfare reform, what do we need to do to encourage people to move from dependency on government to work? Junk lawsuits. We had a terrible situation where our litigation climate, small businesses were being sued left and right. And juvenile justice reform, about which nobody cared anything. But he did.
Yeah.
And so by going out there and talking about how we're discarding a generation of young people who get into trouble, and then our answer is to toss them into a system that will not help them. And we better figure out how, rather than when we get the kid who's acting up in school and turning out to be a problem, and our answer is kick him out of school, we got to figure out how we save him. And the fact that Bush had such passion about it caused people to say, you know what, A, he cares about it, and B, I should care about it. And C, I'm learning about who this guy is. So sometimes it's important for people to, always important for people to talk about the issues that the country is concerned about today: inflation, the border, our status in the world. But it's also important for people to gain a sense of who you are as an individual. So you also ought to better be thinking about what it is you really, really believe and the things you really, really care about.
Yeah, it's beautiful. When you were, deputy chief of staff, you ran arguably the biggest company in the world, the U.S. government in some ways. And that must be incredibly difficult because you have this, you have a position which has theoretically a lot of power, but not a lot of
operational control.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So how do you get people to do what you want them to do in that role?
Well, you have to, you're right. Any president, and look, I was a functionary. So, here's the president, and we all, served at his pleasure and in advance of his goals. What a president needs to do is to put people in place who share his goals and can operationalize them, because it's too big. It's like, think about all the operating divisions of a company. Think about how writ large that's the U.S. government. So, but you've got to have clarity of vision.
Yeah.
And you've got to have people who then share that vision and can execute it.
But I sort of think, maybe this is wrong, but is it slightly like a COO in some ways? Like, you're kind of taking all of his ideas. The vision comes from the president, but then you're like, all right, now it's my job to kind of help figure out how I think we can do this and who we need to get in line.
Well, the people who operate are the heads of the various divisions. We call them departments. Mm-hmm. Those are the people who have to execute. And the administrative agencies and departments of government, that's where you need to have a Secretary of Commerce who says, I'm doing this. Mm-hmm. If my goal in the Interior Department is to make certain that we expand opportunities for environmentally sensitive drilling on federal lands, that's where that happens. If you're the guy who's in charge of the every 20 or 30 year modernization of our nuclear weapons program as the Secretary of Energy, which is really weird, you better have a physicist who can help you advise you on how to do that. So you've got to pick people in each one of those agencies who are capable of operationalizing your vision.
And then what do you see as the chief of staff's role? Like, what was it for you?
Well, I was the deputy chief. Yeah. So I was the deputy chief for policy, which was sort of the hardest job. I was senior advisor all 7 years I was there as deputy chief of staff for 2.5. And I had to keep my mouth shut because my object was, in the policy process, make certain that everybody had a fair shot at laying it out. And so my boss, Andy Card and then Josh Bolton, said, be careful. In fact, Dick Cheney had given me that advice at the very beginning. He said, you've been a friend of the the president-elect, since he was 26 and you were 22, be careful, because people will try and figure out where you are in order thinking that will have an inordinate influence on where he is, and that may or may not be true, but you want people to be saying, here's what I believe.
So interesting.
Yeah.
So
Cheney had been a White House chief of staff at the age of 34, so he knew the pressures, and he knew how important it was that the chief and some of the senior advisors around the president encourage a robust discussion of any issue, not discourage it. And sometimes they could discourage it by simply voicing their opinion too early.
Right. And so that's kind of an interesting way to go down. Dick Cheney, very controversial man too, but very successful man in many different ways.
Right.
Did you watch Vice ever? Did you watch some of those movies?
Yeah, I did. And
how did you feel about your
Well, look, I'm
portrayal?
taller than Cheney. I am taller than Cheney in every single instance. The actor playing me is shorter than the guy playing Cheney.
Is he fitter? You remember?
Well, I'm generally...
Did you like it overall? You thought he was short, but he was sort of handsome? No. You didn't like any
Look, I didn't like... Look, to me, it was like I was always the roly-poly guy.
Were you?
Yeah, sure. Exactly. I mean, you know... Anyway, so can I tell you a Cheney story? Can I tell you a Cheney story? So we're thinking about the vice, who's going to be the running mate, and it's like May of 2000. And Bush is sort of, the more the process goes along, the more he likes Cheney. We got 9 other people we're looking at, and Cheney's in charge of the process, he and Liz, and they have a gigantic collection of material that they've condensed down into a thick notebook on each one of the 9. And we're going through these and talking about who it ought to be. And Bush is on the campaign trail. I think he was like in Iowa or something. And I had a red phone on my desk. Only one person had that phone number. So, red phone wings. Yes, sir. He says, look, I'm coming home tonight, as you know. And he said, I'm getting close. And I know you're not for Cheney. Meet me at the governor's mansion tomorrow at 10 a.m. and tell me why I should not go with Cheney. So I show up at the governor's mansion, which you've seen. It's not a big place.
Yeah.
The Austin Library is about the size of this room, and I'm sitting on one side of the room, about as far away from Bush as you are, maybe a little bit further. And he says, it's 10 o'clock. He says, okay, why shouldn't I go with Cheney? And I had my list of 8 reasons. Number 1, Wyoming. 3 electoral votes, don't need to worry about it in our camp. Pick somebody from a battleground state. Number 2, Cheney had his first heart attack at the age of 34, been working on perfecting it ever since, had 3 more. People say won't last 4 years. Cheney was a very conservative congressman from a very conservative state 18 years ago, and he cast some really stupid votes, like being one of 3 members of the House of Representatives to vote against the resolution calling on the apartheid regime of South Africa to move Nelson Mandela from the island prison where there was no doctor to the mainland prison where there was a doctor and he could get good health care. And Cheney, one of 3 members, to vote against it. We've worked really hard to identify you as your own man, not mini-me to your dad. So what the hell? Let's pick your father's Secretary of Defense in a time of war and make him your running mate. Everybody's going to say Cheney's running the West Wing. People are concerned about you being a Texas oilman. What the hell? Let's have as your running mate the guy who runs the world's largest oil field service equipment company. And, 12th Amendment problem. Anyway, Bush is not a monologue guy, so this is like World Wrestling Federation. I say stupid vote. He says nobody's ever going to bring that one up. Well, how about this stupid vote? Well, that's blah, blah, blah. How about this stupid vote? Oilmen, nobody's blah, blah. Well, what about the data here? Paul says this, Paul says that. It's only going to get worse. So anyway, this goes on for about 30 minutes, and literally at the end of it, I realize I cannot open my jacket because I have sweat through my shirt. This has been so, and I'm laying out the case why not to go with Cheney. And when we're finished, Bush says, got anything else? I said, nope, that's it, sir. He says, good, really good. Turns to the guy next to him and says, Dick, got any questions for Karl? Cheney had been sitting there for 30 minutes while I chewed on his ass.
Oh, my God.
And as we're walking out, Cheney says, I agree with what you have to say. And that night, Bush is back on the campaign trail, and the red phone rings again, and I pick it up, and he says, really good today. He said, really good. He said, very convincing. He said, you outlined 8 political problems, and they are real problems. So put on your little beanie hat with a propeller and start thinking about what you're going to do about it, because I'm going with Cheney. And he said, your job is politics. That's not my job. My job is to pick who'd be the best partner to me in the Oval, and if something bad happened to me, who would the country say, we've got confidence in that guy? And he said, that's going to be Cheney. So I'll be back in a couple of days, whatever, and be prepared. Give me your thoughts on what we need to do to prepare on each one of these.
You've talked in other places about strong versus weak leaders,
right,
and how important a strong leader is to the country, even in just representation.
Right.
What makes a strong versus a weak leader in your eyes?
Well, vision, clarity of purpose, willingness to listen, ability to articulate an agenda, and also when it comes into the international stage, and also when it comes to Congress, the ability to develop personal rapport and personal relationships. We look back at these things, Winston Churchill and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. We look at the relationship between Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. We look at the relationship between Brian Mulroney and Kohl of Germany and George H.W. Bush. And all those are important. So, but strong, a strong leader is somebody who has a vision and a clarity of that vision, an openness to talking about ways forward, and an ability to communicate and the ability to build those kind of relationships. But vision is the most important.
Do you think that there are very many candidates today that come off as weak? It seems like strength, and at least projection of strength, is now critical with social media.
Yeah, well, Biden is...
Oh, that'll be a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, that's one of the big things. If you look at Trump, even if people disagree with him, they recognize that he has strong opinions. And so it was Clinton who once said strong and wrong beats weak and right. But and that may be the case, but strong is what we look for in a leader, particularly as President of the United States.
Sometimes I think that you learn more from reading biography books of billionaires and the very, very successful than you do from self-help books.
Right.
If you had to tell people 3 books of world leaders to read, what would they be?
I'd read almost anything by Winston Churchill that has to do with the great moments in his life, which is the books on World War II. I'd say Reagan. Reagan's an elusive person in many respects, but there are a couple of good biographies of him. Lincoln. There's a plethora of good books on Lincoln. Andrew Jackson. John Meacham has a great book on him. Thomas Jefferson. There are several good volumes on Jefferson. But yeah, I love reading biographies of great leaders, and I love also the books that they write themselves. I mean, Lincoln did not write. Jefferson wrote notes on the state of Virginia, but like Churchill is like, you can just hear him. You can see his mind at work when you read about World War II. You learn a lot about Reagan from his autobiography. But what you learn is how he shaped his life in such a way that he hid the inner man. Anyway.
I want to close out on a couple questions here. So the modern political system seems to require raising a ton of capital and doing a lot of fundraising behind the scenes and the right type of capital from the right people. And I'm just now starting to understand this from some of the groups that is where I've met you before. But you really understand the inner workings. What do you think the average American doesn't understand about fundraising for political candidates and how it actually happens today?
Yeah. Well, today it's, the high net capital comes in the old traditional way. You ask somebody to write a check or make a credit card contribution. But increasingly also a large sum of it comes through the internet.
Right.
In which case it is lots of small dollars from lots of small donors who give continually to the kind of candidate they like to see. And then to a lesser extent mail, which is, I was sort of there during when mail hit its peak. But the other thing that is misunderstood about political political fundraising is the sums may sound big, $1 billion. Each side is going to spend $1 billion. Well, we're at, $22 trillion economy? Yeah. Which is, 22, 220,000 billions. I mean, it's like tiny. Yeah. I mean, the advertising budget for Amazon is bigger. I bet the advertising budget for Coca-Cola is pretty big.
Yeah, you're right. I noticed I signed up for both campaigns to see what their drip sequence was for fundraising. And what's fascinating to me is the use of drops now. So, in e-commerce and in my world in business, you have drops, which is like, hey, here's a limited time XYZ that you get. Here's a scarcity, exclusivity, timeliness, ability for you to go fly on XYZ's jet. And I don't know how much that actually lends itself to how much they're able to fundraise for it, but I've noticed both candidates do these sort of daily or weekly drops. Is this new? I don't remember that last election or the election before.
A lot more merchandise.
It's all merch.
Yeah.
Like, I remember before they would ask just for money. Please donate. The other person's going to ruin the world if you don't do this. And now they're like, do you want this gold hat?
Yeah.
Which is fascinating.
Yeah.
Do you see that only at the presidential level, not at
I'm starting to see it below. I mean, but particularly big races for senator or governor than maybe for Congress, because you have to get at a certain volume of, your special water bottle or your gold hat or whatever.
Yeah, so bizarre. I thought that was fascinating. The other thing that's not very popular in business to talk about is going after your competitor's weakness. It's like that 48, laws of power. You're not supposed to talk about it, but everybody does it. Right. And yet in politics, it seems you actually have to think about what are your competitors' weaknesses and go hard at them. Right. How do you case a competitor or analyze a competitor in the political sphere, and what could business people learn from that?
Yeah, well, when I look at my opponent, I'm looking for, first of all, what are their weaknesses? Where are the things where they're most at odds with public opinion? Yeah. And then I'm also looking for what are the things that they think are strengths that are in essence weaknesses, and go at the thing that they think is their strength, that really is a weakness.
So what would be an example of that?
Well, John Kerry liked the fact that he was, that he wanted to be pure thoughtful, and so nuanced. But what it made him look like in reality was like he was fully capable of going here and going there. So that we've got it. Mark McKinnon picked up on this with an ad. We got footage of him windsurfing on the Columbia River, and so he said this, this, and then he said that. It's like he voted against while we're in combat in Afghanistan and Iraq. He votes against an $87 billion war funding bill. And we bought $11,000 or $14,000 worth of ads in Huntington, West Virginia. I think it was February or March of 2004. He was going to be appearing the next day in front of the VFW audience to talk about his military experience versus Bush's lack of it. So we ran these ads talking about how he voted against, while American troops are under fire in combat, he voted against the $87 billion war funding bill. And because he wanted to be shown as thoughtful and nuanced, he stood up the next day with a microphone in front of the veterans and said, I actually voted for the $87 billion before I voted against it, which became the line that exemplified the 2004 election. So we took what he thought was a strength, I'm a nuanced, thoughtful person, and turned it against him because he was constantly going, psh, psh, I'm against the war in Iraq, but if I voted for the war in Iraq, and I'm against the war in Iraq today. And yet if I was forced to vote on it again, I'd support it again. So I voted against the $87 billion after I voted for the $87 billion, and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. So find particularly something that they want to end up defending as a strength, and go after that.
Yeah. I know you haven't always been the biggest fan of Trump in some ways, and you guys have had some fun little go back and forths, but he does seem to be quite good at this. Yeah. He picks up on the subliminal thing we don't realize we're thinking, and then kind of names them. Yeah.
Yeah, look, the best way to think of him is the executive producer of The Apprentice. Yes. So he has a highly rated TV show, and his object is to think about what is it that attracts the viewer, holds the viewer, and can surprise the viewer. Yeah. Think about how he's doing it with the vice presidential pick here. I've got a list of names. I've already made the decision. I'm not going to tell you who it is, and I'm blah, 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 blah. And, I mean, we're all paying attention to it.
It is marketing 101. I remember, actually, Tanner and I were sitting in a back room at an event where Vivek and I were both speaking. And at that time, that was before, early on. And he had a really bad Instagram, like a really bad Instagram. And silly technical things, like he would do videos this way, not this way. And he wouldn't hit, he was thinking about it almost like Twitter. Twitter gives you a little bit more pause. It allows for you to have like a really hard-hitting one-liner. Anyway, so I didn't really think much of it. But, when he was chatting with us, I was like, oh, let me see your Instagram. And I was like, well, this is really bad. And you should, and then I said, how much money do you spend on this? And they told me how much money. And I was like, well, this is awful. Like, you should be spending 1/10 of that to get, something a lot better. Yeah, Ramaswamy. And what was interesting is we showed him Trump's, I guess would that have been pre-Truth Social? I guess it must have been, but he was somewhere at the time. Maybe it was like Rumble or one of those other platforms. And the man's ability to get to the hook immediately is second to none. But then, Vivek kind of applied the same idea of like immediate hook to his Instagram. And now, it's doing really well. Although I remember talking to you about it and I was like, what do you think about Vivek? Could he win? And you're like, he's not going to win. He's not going to get even close, which you were right. But as an outsider, I can't tell at all who will win.
Yeah, I can't either.
Well, you're right there.
Yeah, I was right there.
You were right there. Okay. The last thing I want to end on here is, was there a time besides Carrie with, somebody more recent day in the advent of social media usage where you did the same thing, where you saw, hey, your competitor's doing this, we should do it this way?
Well, we've done it a number of times in this. I'm involved in the Senate Leadership Fund, and they're constantly doing things like that, using social media to eviscerate. I'm lost at a moment here as to exactly who, but we've done it. We constantly are doing that.
How often is it just one ad can turn the tide for it?
One ad can't turn the tide. One ad can if the tide is turning, it can accelerate it. But no, look, that's the thing about it. It is consistent, persistent messaging. Yeah. It's not, sort of one explosive ad. For example, look, all the concern now about Biden and his debate performance would not be as strong and powerful and determinative as it is if we hadn't seen this before.
100%. Yeah.
We've already seen him. We've already had our doubts, and those doubts have been lingering and growing, and this just sort of taps it and forces it to have a much bigger impact.
Did you see the Kamala BET ad?
No.
With Taraji Henderson? Oh, it's so good. We should play it right now.
Yeah, girl, I'm out here in these streets. And let me tell you, you're right, Taraji. There is so much at stake in this moment. The majority of us believe in freedom and equality. But these extremists, as they say, they not like us.
But now the ad that they created is actually being used against her.
Good ads. There's a great guy who was an ad maker in the 50s and 60s and 70s, Tony Schwartz. And he said the importance of an ad is its resonance with what's already in our minds. So he had a 15-second ad. All it had, this is a 1968 campaign, he had one word on there, Agnew, and 15 seconds of canned laughter, because everybody thought Agnew was a joke. And so the ads that reinforce what we have already sort of have concluded about it and put it in a frame of importance are the most powerful ads of all.
That's a really good thing to remember, because often I think they're trying to do something completely different. They're trying to make themselves look cool.
Yeah, it's less, let me tell you something then. What's already in your minds, and how do I then evoke a response based on what's already in your mind?
That's really good. I think I want to end with 9/11. I've heard you tell a story before about that moment, and I'd love for you to talk about that day, that moment, and what it was like.
Well, I'll give you the short version because it can go on for a while, because, if you're in a place like I happened to be that day, you remember everything. I mean, we all remember when something big in our lives happened, and that was a big, big moment. And I was with the president in Florida, and at 8:48 a.m., my assistant, Susan Ralston, called and said a plane has flown into the World Trade Center. We don't know if it's jet or prop, commercial or private. And he was standing about 10 feet away from me, and I went over and told him. A few minutes later, Condi Rice called with the same sketchy information. And we went into the Emma Booker Elementary School, and we went into the staff hold room next door to where he was going to be watching a reading demonstration with a bunch of kids. And then he walked in there, and we were watching on television. Then the second plane flew into the World Trade Center. And Andy Card knew he needed to go tell him, and did. That's the famous photograph of, he's cupped his hand and he's telling the president. I've known the president a long time, and a different person came back into that staff hold, and his voice was steel, and he was quiet, and but you could hear it, and he said, "We're at war. Give me the director of the FBI and the vice president." We jumped on the secure phones in the staff hold, got a hold of Robert Mueller, FBI director, had started work 10 days before, but we couldn't get Vice President Cheney because at that moment he was being grabbed under his armpits by two Secret Service agents who were running down a hallway in the West Wing to get him to a secret entrance to the PIOC, the President's Emergency Operations Center. But there is a fog of war, and the president, after he came in and he had one conversation, we needed to say something to the press. He sat down. This classroom had been emptied of adult furniture. So it had that little table for the kindergartners and a little chair, and he sat down and is scribbling with Dan Bartlett, Ari Fleischer, and I are talking to him about what he might want to say, and he is sort of outlining what he wants to say. And Eddie Morenzel, the head of the Secret Service detail that day, came up, tall, thin guy, short, thin guy, came up and said, "Mr. President, we need to get you to Air Force One and airborne as quickly as possible." His whereabouts were known, and what they were worried about was there were going to be another hijacker who was going to fly into Admiral Booker Elementary School. So we got on the motorcade a few minutes later and went to the airport. And so we're going to the motorcade. He whistled to me and pointed to the back seat of the limo, presidential limo, Stagecoach, codename Stagecoach, to ride with him to the airport. And nobody said much on the way to the airport. Andy Card sitting backwards looking at us. President on the right side, I'm on the left side. And the phone rang, a little phone in the corner, and he picked it up and held it to his ear. And I could hear only one side of the conversation, but I knew it was bad when he said his Rumsfeld alive, the strike on the Pentagon. Got to the airplane. Normally I'd be in a cabin. He'd get on the Air Force One, and there'd be the first cabin is his private office, and then there's a hallway, and then there's the stairwell up to the cockpit, and there's a little medical unit, a little galley, and then there's the senior staff cabin. 4 people sit in there, and senior staff, and then a big conference room, and then regular seating for guests of the president, and then staff, and then at the back of the plane, just sort of like Southwest Airlines seats for the media. But again, I didn't even get to the staff cabin. He whistled and had me sit down across from him, and that's where I spent most of the day, was in the private office with him. And it was a day. I remember at one point, there was an argument as to whether or not we should return to Washington, and he was like, "I'm coming back to Washington." And finally the Air Force, Cheney called him, said, "Don't come back, we don't know." Rumsfeld stops fighting the fires and leaves to come and calls, "Don't go." Finally, Tom Gould, who was the Air Force military aide, came in and said, "Mr. President, we have too many people on the plane. The plane was full. So we have too much weight, and we're not full. We don't have a full fuel load. We got to the airport a heck of a lot before we were supposed to." So he said, "If we get over Washington and can't land, we're not going to be able to rotor as long as we want to rotor." So he said, "I recommend we land at a military base that's on lockdown, offload unessential personnel, fuel the plane up, and then we can return." And which the president reluctantly agreed to. But then it was sort of a dodge. They were trying to keep him from coming to Washington. So we were literally like near Naval Air Station Jacksonville. Instead, we bend west. Don't land there. Don't land at Tyndall. Don't land at Eglin. Don't land at Keesler. Instead, we land at Barksdale Air Force Base in North Louisiana, because they were on lockdown. The day before, they had started a test drill. This was the headquarters of the 8th Air Force, and they kept losing nuclear weapons, And so they said, we're gonna have a training program for a few days. So there were no civilian personnel on the base, and it was completely locked down. And we landed there. And as we're on final approach, nobody knows where we are. As we're on final approach, literally the local TV station has a camera on the flight path, and so they pick up Air Force One landing at Barksdale. That's the first time the nation knows where we are. So, and this is, remember, this is before. I mean, we have radio telephones on the plane, but they're being used. So I have a BlackBerry that I have to carry for political messages from the RNC, and we passed it around so that people could email their spouses and say, "I'm okay, I'll be back in touch with you," and it'd spool up the messages. And then when we'd fly over, wherever, Panama City or Pensacola, it would download the messages, and people would be able to communicate with their families.
What a moment in history. If you had to leave people listening with sort of one reason to be positive about where we are today, what would you leave them with?
Our country is a great country full of compassionate, creative, energetic, entrepreneurial people. There's a great deck I saw this past weekend that measured our country. We're the most competitive. We're the most entrepreneurial. We're the most creative. We have a standard of living that is, amazing for the world. People want to come here. Like, of the top 25 universities that are attended by foreigners, we're like, 20 of the 25. I mean, people want to come here because of the strengths and compassion and energy of our country. Our country think about it. Our country was founded and replenished over the centuries by the losers, lightweights, and discards of the world, the wretched refuse. My great-grandfather was a peasant from Norway. I suspect there's a struggler not too far back in the background of you and every American. And yet we are who we are as a country. The strengths of our country are enormous, and we will falter only when we lose confidence in ourselves. And the American dream, the American theory that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that our Constitution, which gives us a form of representative democracy, all these things are enormous strengths that have created the greatest nation on the face of the earth in history, and those strengths are still there. They do not lie in any one individual. It's not like we're a monarch. It's not in one institution. We're not the Communist Party of China. We are the United States of America, and as a result, we have unique strengths that we can call upon in moments of danger and challenge. And this is a moment of challenge, and it will be a moment of danger in the world that we live in. But and I have every confidence in our country and its institutions.
Mr. Karl Rove.
Thanks for having me.
So much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
A couple things stand out to me about Karl Rove. I've been at some of his political events in Texas and been in rooms where he is speaking. And you don't get to the highest levels of political office or appointment without being pretty brilliant. But there are two things that stuck out with me the most from Karl Rove. And that is, when I asked him how smart he was, he said, "I'm not that smart, but I'm super obsessed." That is hard to compete with. An obsessed person will beat a curious person any day of the week. And so as you're listening to this, I think the question to ask yourself is, where could you become so obsessed that you sound like Karl Rove about the thing that you're talking about? He has this monologue in there where he goes through every single reason why we are not at one of the worst points in American history. And he tells it by month and date for like 100 years over the course of American history. And you cannot remember that kind of thing if you are not obsessed. I think a lot of times in life, we do the things that we are told to do. You're in a job maybe because somebody told you that you should take that job, that that career was a good one, that you'd make a lot of money, that it might be a good fit for you. But where does your mind go where you get so entrenched in the thing that you're doing that nobody else can beat you because you'll just force function more time on it? And I want you to ask yourself that. I also really left with this feeling that America's alive by a man who's suffered multiple losses. He's lost presidential campaigns. He's been fired. He's lost congressional campaigns. He's been beaten up on Fox News. He's been yelled at Twitter. As he mentioned, he can't even have a sign with his name on it at the airport because some people will heckle them because, immediately if you out for either party, 50% of the country hates you. And yet, look at the optimism on this man. And that to me was something to really lean into. I think a lot of times as we age, we get more negative and pessimistic. Kids these days, not how it was back in my day. And that is absolutely and completely not the theory that he has. He's the opposite. He's like, there's no better time to be alive, and the best and brightest future is in front of us as long as we don't lose hope, as we continue to believe in America. There's this Japanese tradition where they take a vase that's been broken, or really any piece of ceramics or pottery that's been broken, and as opposed to throwing it away, they glue it back together with this gold glue. So it kind of looks like veins running through the pottery. And the reason that they do that is, they say, because the broken parts are what makes us beautiful. The cracks are where the light comes in the famous words of Leonard Cohen, one of my favorite poems. And I think it's really important for us to have this perspective in this day and age. The months to come are going to be awful. Listening to two former president and a current president yell at each other and call one person stupid, the other person stupid. My golf game's better. Your golf game's better. You're the worst president. You're the worst president. No, I'm the best president. No, I'm the best president. That's not fun for anybody to listen to. I don't want to listen to my family members do it. I certainly don't want to listen to third-party people do it. And yet, that is going to be what's in front of us. Taking a little zoom out and having some perspective and being able to do what's called go to the balcony. So one of my favorite mentors back in the day, her name was Yang Butler, used to tell me that the way she came from the Philippines, having no money, came to the U.S., immigrated, went to Harvard, became one of the senior executives at State Street at the time, I think has gone on to be a senior executive at another firm, and has kids, has this incredible life, has done really well for herself, was this one idea. And the idea is, anytime you're in the midst, imagine like a mosh pit at a concert where everybody's yelling, they're throwing each other around, you can't see over the fray, you can't find your friends, you're just in it, taking blows everywhere, right? And she's like, that's what usually happens in our day-to-day. We're in the mosh pit, stuff's happening all around us, we're being reactive, we don't have context, we can't step out of the fray. She goes, I want you to imagine yourself every time that happens, being able to walk up and stand on a balcony. So imagine now you can see over the mosh pit and into the broader picture. And what do you realize? You realize the mosh pit is actually this small. It's the size of a quarter on a football field. And all around the football field are actually pretty normal people walking around, having a drink, having a pretzel, listening to the music way in the back. It's only right in the front where things are the gnarliest, where you stood, that the mosh pit is happening. And I remember that often for when I'm having difficult moments, when I'm getting trolled, when my businesses are struggling, when things are going wrong in my marriage or relationship. How can I get up on the balcony and see that the world's not all on fire? I just happen to be standing next to a fire pit. And so this episode did that for me. I hope it does it for you. Oh, if you guys haven't already, do me a huge solid. Like and subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. That is the only way we grow. And a lot of you guys, turns out like 40 to 50% of you listen to all of these and then don't subscribe. So I want to make sure that we get to you every single week in a moment where you're going to get a bunch of stuff in your ear you don't need. Hopefully, this is one of the things you do need. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week on the Big Deal Podcast. What do you see in founders who are winners or losers?
I borrowed this one from Jeff Bezos. He said, I only look for one thing, determinism that's unbridled.
Bill Gurley is a legendary venture capitalist, early investor in Uber, DoorDash, Asana, eBay, Snap. And today we're breaking down who will actually survive in an AI-dominated world and the skill stack that makes you anti-fragile instead of obsolete. I kind of want to go to AI.
I think AI is a superpower. There's never been a better time in the history of the world. It's insane, the opportunity that's out there for you. Kobe Bryant, after winning his 4th championship, asked if he could come to Houston to learn Hakeem's footwork in the post. It's a powerful statement that someone with that much success was trying to find an area where they could improve. I ask anyone who's chasing any career, are you like that?
The question I have for you is what do you see in founders who are winners or losers?
One element of being a great founder, and we're talking about people that can not just start a small company, but one that can grow it into a much bigger company. One element is salesmanship. And it's not something that you hear a lot of people talk about, but in order to grow a company to a very large size, obviously you have to sell customers, but you also have to sell employees. And you have to sell partnerships, and you have to sell incremental investors, and you're just out, and you own the brand of the company, which you're likely promoting ad nauseum. And if you're not good at that, it'll be very difficult to outrun the other company, that may be competing for that. So that's one. It's took me probably my entire 25 years to come to terms with this. But I think you really need to be great at product. Like you just have to be. And I used to try and convince myself that wasn't true. And I learned the lesson the hard way a couple of times. And the really great founders have this instinct, not just for the best practices for products today, but where those are going to go when the new technologies allow them to shift to the next place. And that really matters. Many great startups have a go-to-market advantage. They've figured out some hack to get to customers faster. And so that's another element that could be important. And then I borrowed this from Jeff Bezos. I asked him once, how in the world do you do so many amazing angel investments while you're running Amazon? And he said, I only look for one thing, which is that this person's going to go do this thing they claim they want to go do come hell or high water. Like whether I'm involved or not, like this kind of determinism that's unbridled. Like it's just, there's nothing that's going to stop me from doing this. And he has a way of sensing that. So that's another good tip, perhaps.
Do you have a way of sensing if somebody is just going to stay in it until they either do it or they break them?
There's a couple of things you can look for. Like, did they fall into it opportunistically? Because then it might not be there, you know? And some people, I remember when we did the first Uber investment, Travis, his first couple of companies, one of them I think ended up in bankruptcy. The other one, they got money back, but it was pretty obvious he hadn't touched the brass ring and really, really, really wanted to. And he could sense that this thing was going to work like way bigger than the first two he was on. And I could just tell he wasn't going to not lean in as hard as he possibly could. You could feel it.
Yeah, it's funny. We have a founder. I won't say his name, but he's a stud. But he now has a company. It's worth multiple $1 billion. And we jokingly say he's either going to be a trillionaire or he's going to go to prison because
he's so determined.
Yeah, there's just no way. And
Josh Wolf of Lux Capital has a saying: "Chips on shoulders, put chips in pockets."
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. Just this, and that it's a little bit of a pivot from the unbridled determinism, but kind of this the chip on a shoulder thing is another example of that determinism. Like, I got something to prove. I really have something to prove.
Yeah. What is the opposite of this? Like, you had a blog post I love.
And by the way, a lot of that stuff I mentioned, nowhere in there did I mention the idea, or the specific business. And we've seen incredible businesses be built by great founders who have pivoted 180 degrees from the original idea. Yeah. Discord's that way, for example. And Slack was famously that way. So the person matters more than the concept.
How did they know when to give up on Discord, for answer? How do you know when to give up on an idea?
I think you can reach a point where none of the math works. The team that built Nextdoor originally had built a website for sports enthusiasts, and it was out there. It had 1 million users, but based on ad rates and everything and the growth rate, it needed to be 100x bigger, and that looked impossible. And you tilt and tilt and tilt and tilt. Yeah.
So you don't want to get tied to the idea. You want to get tied to an outcome.
I was fortunate to be at a place at Benchmark Capital where we were, and they still are, competing to be the best in the business. Mm-hmm. And the game's a little different at that level because you're looking for the grand slam home run outcomes. And you're not, it's not a game of IRR. It's not a game of, it's more like a mid-market PE where you need, you can only have one failure. The winners are so big at that level, you could have 80% of your portfolio fail. So it's a game that's a lot riskier and you're searching for the really big outcomes. So some of the decision-making's different.
Yeah, it's really important to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't need to have, because most people don't want that life. Most people actually want, and I imagine it's pretty miserable. I mean, we run a couple pretty big companies from our standards, and it ain't easy.
I've shared two thoughts with founders that relate to what you're saying. One, I had the unfortunate position of telling founders when they achieve some level of success that it only gets harder going up, and like it just keeps getting harder. And if you think growing $100 million company is hard, try growing $1 billion company. And the expectations go up, and the number of people whose livelihood are counting on you, the employee base goes up, and it just gets harder. And the only solace I have for them is I always tell them, if you're going to look up the ladder, make sure you look down the ladder. You know, it's just like, make sure you celebrate how far you've moved. Because I talk to a lot of people who are probably in the top 2 percentile of all startups, and they're pretty stressed about not being, above themselves. And the other thing I tell a lot of founders, which I think may really relate with your audience, is, venture capital, it may not be a good fit for your business. And very oftentimes in venture capital, especially if you're partnering with a firm like I just described, where they're trying to have these massive outcomes, a Series A quickly becomes a Series B, quickly becomes a Series C. And before you know it, the founder's equity is down around 10% or lower. And, if you can self-fund your business, you can exit at $30 to $50 million and make lifetime wealth. But if you start down this path and get down to 10%, you now need to sell for $500 million to get that same outcome, which is a lot harder to achieve. And so, just make sure that that's what you need, and make sure that that's what you want. I actually think that there are far more companies that want to do tuck-in $30 to $50 million acquisitions than want to do $500 million. Like it's probably 100x easier to get that type of deal done.
It's a really good point. You kind of have had this history of saying some of the hard things that's not consensus in VC continuously.
Yeah.
I was going through your old blog that, you've had for 30 years, last couple of years, maybe a little bit less, but there were
definitely less.
there were like 2 blog posts I really, really loved. And one I remember when it came out was, it was actually about red flags in companies. And it came out like 2 weeks after FTX, basically. So it was like incredible timing. And you basically talked about all the reasons why. And I had I have a quote in here from it that I just want to read. It was, I have over 40 years of legal and restructuring experience, never in my career seen such a complete failure of corporate controls and such a complete absence of trustworthy financial information as occurred here. And so what I would love to know from you is what are the biggest red flags in business? And what did you see in that deal that you were like, guys, how did you miss this?
Well, by the way, it's tricky because I just told you that there are firms out there that want to find the biggest grand slam home runs they possibly can. And so the best way to make sure you have exposure to as many of those as you can is to be and look as founder friendly as you possibly can. And so if you combine hyper competition at the investor level, from the time I entered the venture career to the time I left, competition only went in one direction. It increased, and it's more competitive today than ever. And if you have that hyper competition, and if the best way to ingratiate yourself to a founder and potentially get a new deal is to be as friendly as possible, you create a scenario where this is very likely to happen, like super likely to happen. And so I don't know that there's a way around it because the option is I think that the competitive level is so high that you're going to test this boundary constantly. You're just going to test the boundary. And some of the best founders are very determined. We use the word deterministic, and aren't looking for constraints. And so it's kind of ripe for this to happen,
Yeah, that's true.
But it gets rationalized, And so I was actually at a dinner with some of the FTX investors about 2 months before it blew up, and I asked all the questions that are in the red flags, and they were aware of all of those risks, but didn't have a way to manage it.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, on the other end of the spectrum.
But it's okay. I mean, look, it's everyone's wearing their, what would you say, big boy underwear in this game. And so,
you hope.
not to, I hope that's not gender biased, but this is one of the reasons why there's a number of people that want to push to have everyday retail investors be able to invest in these types of companies. And this is one of the reasons why I'm somewhat cynical about that idea, because the people that are doing this kind of know the risks they're taking, but I'm not sure that everyone would understand, including the failure rate issue.
I completely agree with you.
These pass the hat SPVs that are happening everywhere, special purpose vehicles. You're probably aware of this. Like, people are going to get burned.
Well, why don't you explain a special purpose vehicle and how somebody might say they invested in SpaceX, but ridiculous fees and at a wild valuation.
So let me back up just a minute, because I think it's important to frame it. In a venture capital fund, so this is a fund that limited partners are going to invest in, which are traditionally university endowments, fellowships, that kind of thing, foundations. That venture capital firm will have an agreement with these investors that includes something called a look back. And what the look back says is, if you take money from the first 3 winners and then don't return anything else, a bunch of losers, you owe us back what was in those losers. So there's an investment agreement that kind of looks at the fund and the portfolio holistically. An SPV, special purpose vehicle, is when a investor is representing a group of other investors for a single investment, and it doesn't have a look back, and there's no portfolio. And so they'll take fees, not always, but sometimes they'll take management fees and a rake, some form of carry, on this single investment. And if any VC could strike a deal with their LPs where every single investment was a SPV, they would do it. But they don't do it. And that's kind of the point. And there's a concept in gambling in Vegas called a free roll. And I often think about, from the GP's perspective, the person underwriting the SPV, the one trying to talk you into investing in it, I think they got a free roll. Because if it works, they make money. If it doesn't work and they got fees, they still make money. And they got nothing in it. And so the only way I would ever consider an SPV is if the underwriter is putting 50% of the money in or more, but they're probably not at all. And so, and these have become particularly popular in the last year or two. And I would just, it's funny, this whole AI thing, the ups and downs that have happened, the funny thing is, the best bet all along has just been the index, like the S&P index, because you were exposed to AI because NVIDIA became such a large part of it.
Or now Apple with hardware.
Yeah, you had all these big companies that were already overweighted in the index that were AI exposed. And here now, where we have the fear of AI starting to cause valuations to crumble, the S&P has performed pretty well. And if you're sitting there holding a basket of high tech new companies, you got wiped out in the past 3 months.
I was looking at the numbers like a couple days ago, and, we've seen massive January layoffs. We've seen some of the worst jobs numbers since 2009. We've seen decreasing non-farm payroll numbers since basically 2022. We've seen decrease in overall job creation in the US.
Yeah.
And so I think people right now are saying, oh my God,
they are.
Forget doing what I want for a living. Am I going to have a job?
Yes.
And you have such a history with these tech companies. One, I guess I would say, how could somebody find a career right now that is safe? Is there a way even?
So if you look before AI, there was a Gallup poll in 2023, and it's only 23% of people identified as engaging and satisfied at work. 59% did not. And the other 19 are actively unhappy at work. And I think that's interesting, and I look at what we've done with the traditional career path, and we've created this conveyor belt from, it starts really early. I think it starts about 6th grade, where parents start worrying about their kids' college application. And Jonathan Haidt calls it the resume arms race. And we just start packing it full of extra credit classes and cello lessons and lacrosse lessons and all this stuff. And, when I was younger, like, our parents would let us like roam the city for days, and not know where we were. It was just a totally different time. But these kids are so pushed into this pressure cooker. And then they get into college and then you got to get a job. And I think well-intentioned parents are pushing kids towards these safe jobs. And I've raised 3 children, and I can tell you the intuition to do that is really strong. Mm-hmm. It's just like built into your DNA. I don't think it's no malintent whatsoever. You just want them to be okay. You want them to be fine. And so over the past 30 years, that's been, make them a banker, make them a computer scientist, make them a consultant. And these jobs happen to be under AI threat. But I think people weren't happy before that. And I'd like to, if you'd allow me, because I think the AI thing is super interesting, I'd like to juxtapose 2 things for you. One, if you are accepting this kind of conveyor belt process where you're going to go exactly in line with how you're told, how everybody else is doing it. You're going to go be a computer scientist at the best school. You're going to interview with the companies that come there. So you're you're doing what you're told, and you're following where they've told you to go. I think those people, AI is a huge threat, because they don't really know why they're there. They just showed up and they were told to do this, and there's 100 other people around them that look just like them, and they're all interviewing for the same job, and they're not differentiated, and it's scary as all get out. Now, I want to juxtapose that with, let's say you're somebody that has an immense passion for something that's very bespoke, where they're out running in their own lane and trying to chart their own course. For that individual, is AI a threat or is it a jetpack? I actually think it's a jetpack, because now I can go learn about anything I want. I can go study about anything I want. It's never been easier to learn faster because of this tool called AI. I can build things with less people. I can write code. I can do videos. And so if you're your own champion and you're in your own lane, I think AI is a superpower. But it's an interesting juxtaposition, right? Like, is it a threat or is it a help? And I think it's kind of dependent on the game you're playing.
I actually haven't thought about it that way, but it makes all the sense in the world. You can almost feel the people who are excited by AI because they want to practically apply it right now, immediately to something.
Yeah.
And the people who just think, oh, Lord, I used to do X task. Now somebody else is going to do the task.
Right. There's a funny story that I think is relevant, which I think it was Bjorn Borg. There was a tennis player who retired very early. I think it was Bjorn Borg. And when he retired was the kind of final years of the wooden tennis racket. And he decided to make a comeback. I hope it was him. I hope I got the name right. And about 5 years later, and everyone had switched to these big graphite rackets, and he refused to use one because he was used to the tool he had, and he got obliterated. Like, wasn't even close. And, there are many anthropologists that have studied the fact that humans evolve with their tools. And so you could, who's more fit, someone in Naked and Afraid or someone, with a bulldozer and a calculator and a computer. Like, it's pretty obvious, right? And this tool has come along very quickly, AI, and it has capabilities that really matter to make a human more fit, more kind of evolutionarily fit. And if you don't lean into it and figure out how it can most impact the career you're in, you're more likely to be susceptible to being displaced.
Yeah.
Like, the best anecdote is to run at it, like to play with it all the time.
Yeah, I liked that line you have. I think you had a line basically like that, like, you have to become the most aggressive user of AI in your field, run at it, because that's how you keep evolving.
No doubt.
Which I love. Well, so
and by the way, that'll be true of the next disruptive technology as well.
This doesn't feel like you've seen every technology that, has probably felt this way to the masses over the last 30 years. Does this feel different to you? It
feels a little different, I think, because it threatens white collar workers so fast. Mm-hmm. Like, I think a lot of the waves before, so I mean, you go way back to just automation in factories and the agriculture, what happened to agriculture with the rise of machines and look, I think in the U.S. used to be 98% agriculture at the top, and it's like less than 2% now. So we've survived these things, like they happen, but this one's unique, I think. And that's why it's created so much anxiety.
I love Bill's takes on how to find our best careers, because I just read this crazy statistic that by 2030, up to 30% of current jobs could be automated. McKinsey says as many as 375 million workers may need to switch occupations. And Goldman says AI could impact 300 million full-time roles. Here's what no one wants to admit. It's not the robots that win, it's the owners of attention. So when distribution gets automated, when content gets generated, when noise goes infinite, the scarce asset isn't actually skill, it's taste and audience. If you don't own your audience, you rent your income, and rent goes up. That's why I've been thinking a lot about email lately. Not the boring kind, the kind that turns ideas into movements, which brings me to something I've been using behind the scenes, Beehive. Beehive is this all-in-one platform for building, growing, making money on your newsletter. But here's what actually matters. It's built for people who already create. So you can publish, you can grow with built-in referral tools and recommendations, you can monetize from day one, like ads, subscriptions, boosts, without stitching together 5 different tools. You own the audience. No algorithms deciding whether your work gets seen and whether those closest to you actually hear from you. Solo creators are turning newsletters into 6- and 7-figure businesses. I turned mine into, some ways you could say, a 9-figure business. If AI is going to commoditize content, then the move is obvious. Build a list. Own the relationship. If you're already creating, or you should be, you can actually go to beehive.com. I asked them for a code for us. It's BEEHIIV.com. And then you can use code Codie30 for 30% off for 3 months. I don't think we should wait for the future. We should own something.
What are the skills you need to have to win in the age of AI in your mind?
Immense curiosity, because you have to play with this thing. And, you've got to get over the skepticism. I've met some really intelligent people. Some of the top academics that I happen to have relationships with, who are just doubters. They get it to hallucinate once, and then they run around and tell everybody about how it gave them the wrong answer. And boy, that's dangerous. Like, it's just so dangerous to walk around being skeptical in that way.
Yeah.
I think it's far too powerful to be that way. But I see it. I see it a lot.
Yeah, Greg Brockman, I think, had a tweet today that I liked, which just said that, like, taste is now a real skill. And I feel that a little bit. I saw this graph. I should have brought it for you that I thought was really good. But it was basically like a little, fourplex. And in the bottom, it was like bad judgment, good judgment, and then non-AI use, AI use, or high AI use. And and then it said basically, if you have bad judgment and AI use, slop cannon, you create a lot of really bad things. Good judgment, lot of AI use, sort of superhuman. You create incredible things. Yeah. And I've been thinking about that lately because I felt it. We did this job posting, Bill, and I was like, we're hiring sort of vibe coders. We're hiring them in every single department. We're hiring engineers as well, but we already have engineers that we've been hiring. I've never hired this person. It's just like AI curious. And we get thousands of applications for it, right? But then as I'm going through it, I'm like, wow, people have built a lot of stuff, but a lot of it is a questionable choice of what you are building and how and why. And that product is actually really terrible from a UI perspective, right? Yeah. So I'd be curious for you, like, in this world, it does seem like you have to really have taste about what you build and why too. Do you think that's true? And if so, how do you tell if somebody has it or not?
Yeah, I mean, it may be that both relationships and taste become even more important because of the volume of information that can be created could create more noise. One thing I would really tell people and you've probably been down this path yourself, but like the more you use AI, the more you understand and intuitively have a feel for what it's capable of. And then the more you push it and into places you might not have thought about before.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised. I was surprised yesterday, like, oh, wow. It figured that out. Yeah. And if you're not playing with it every day, not only do you not know what it's capable of, but you're not developing your skills to get it to be as good as it can possibly be for you. Like there is an element, people used the phrase prompt engineering before, but I think it's more than that. I think it's having awareness of when it might help you and knowing you can go to it more often.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I guess it's almost like you'll see an expert with all the ways they know how to utilize a tool, any type of tool.
No doubt. And the stuff that came out in the past 2 weeks, which I haven't played with yet, or even more of that.
That's my existential
I haven't
drag.
built a claw bite yet, but probably should.
My president just did, and he came in wild-eyed yesterday. He's like, I've been working on it for the 4th day. I didn't sleep last night. I'm like,
I love that.
But me too. And
I
you know
love
what?
that.
He's
I
the
love
former
that.
president of Mr. Beast. He's a super successful guy. He makes a ton of money. He's built a lot of companies.
Yeah.
And yet even he is so curious about what's happening.
Yeah, and you were asking about the elements of a great founder, like that part's in there. They can't stand, they have immense FOMO about new technologies. That's
a great line. Chris Sacca had said something really interesting about you, totally off the AI subject. But Chris Sacca said that when you are in a meeting, you will be sitting there silent for most of the meeting. And then you'll say like 10 poignant words that will change the trajectory of the entire meeting. And you're a humble guy and you didn't even want to write like a memoir. You wanted to write something to help people. So I'm sure you hear that quote and you're like, whatever, Chris. But
no, that's not my reaction. Go ahead and finish the question.
But my question is like, you're in rooms with these power players all over the world. You're in rooms with other big investors, all your partners at Benchmark. How do you make your words count? How do you get heard by people?
By the way, that thing Chris described is a evolved skill, not something that came naturally. And